next topic is actually a pretty polarizing topic in the world of video games, right, Dom? Hit us with your topic.
Yeah, so last week I griped a little bit about GTA and why it's just not for me. I wanted to extend that into it's not as prominent today, but early 2000s it was the popular like Fox News thing to do was just bash on video games and how much violence they have, and it goes against family morals and it's corrupting our youth and this and that. I don't see it so much anymore. Again, we're kind of past that, I think, as a society. It's just become our culture. But I want to see what your guys' thoughts are on that kind of perspective. I'll first throw out that I think it's indisputable that if you're playing a lot of violent shooting video games as a kid, it desensitizes you to shooting people. Like, it just absolutely does. Obviously, not as much as actually shooting someone would over and over, but I think it's indisputable that does affect you over time and time again. When you've shot 100 people in the head in a game, you're just a little more desensitized to it. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone who has ever killed someone illegally or whatever did so because they played a lot of video games, right? I look at it as kind of like a gateway drug sort of thing where not everyone who smokes marijuana ends up doing heroin, but everyone who does heroin used to do marijuana,
Dom.
kind of thing, right?
Everyone knows if you smoke marijuana, you'll end up on heroin, no doubt about it.
Right. It's not
sarcasm,
like exactly.
People.
It's not like saying
that's sarcasm. I hope
yeah. I'm not saying that like if you play a lot of violent video games, then you're guaranteed to go and kill people. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying like it has to have at least some slight psychological effect. I don't think you can logically deny that. Now, after all that, I'm a pretty hardcore like libertarian, so I would never suggest that we censor anything for anyone like in any means. You know what I mean? That's just how I feel about those kinds of things. But it's important. Like the game ratings are important, and I would never let my kids play the majority of video games, that I play now. Right? I just wouldn't. Not until they're 15, 16, or whatever I deem appropriate. So the ESRBs are pretty. They're not always the best, but it's a good thing to start your
hold
judgment
on. You're telling me you didn't play M-rated video games till you were 15 or 16?
I think Call of Duty was the first M-rated game I played.
Didn't you talk about playing that in middle school?
But you also say to your family, family didn't let you watch Harry Potter. Yeah.
Yeah,
well, that's
exactly.
like younger.
I mean, no, it was worse than that though, because the transition from like only playing T games to M games wasn't that big. The bigger issue was when I was between 8 and 10 or 11, when we weren't allowed to even play the T games. You know what I mean?
Damn.
And that like the difference there is so ridiculous. When you get up to M, it's like your Grand Theft Autos and your Call of Duties. It's like, yeah, that's mature, and there's a lot of stuff going on. The difference between E and T was so silly. I remember playing the first Lego Star Wars was a rated E game, and I loved it. But then like the Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, movie-based Star Wars game was rated T, and I wasn't allowed to get it. Eventually, like after like a year, I convinced my dad to let me rent it or whatever. But it's such a silly thing to base these decisions off of. Like it's Star Wars. Like I was allowed to watch the movies and play the Lego version, but you know what I mean? It didn't. No, there's some T games that I probably should have stayed away from, but it just seems it can get arbitrary and like it's not really effective in what it's trying to do. But so just want to see what you guys think about violence and game ratings or whatever else you want to throw in there.
So I don't know if I was raised differently than you guys, but so for me, I'm a pretty smart guy for the most part. And when my mom raised us, she essentially felt that we were smart enough to learn things. And there's also a counter argument to this. You say that to a certain extent, it can desensitize you, but also if you shelter your kids too much, that can also affect them. So that way, when they're actually exposed to this kind of stuff, it could have a more drastic effect on them. There's also a definite counter argument.
There's learning about something, and then there's like diving headfirst into shooting 100 people in a game a day. You know what I mean? It's different than a sex talk.
But violence has always been around. It's not just in video games.
Yep.
And I think all the understanding of your kids and what your kids can handle. I don't think you should have kids automatically. This is me personally speaking. Everyone can do their own thing, but for me, it's like I should automatically say, okay, at 13 they can watch this, or at 15 they can watch this. For me, as my child grows and I realize what their understanding capabilities are and how they look on the world and how they learn and stuff like that. I think it's definitely a case by case basis. I was able to watch rated R movies since I was a young kid. And I didn't have any negative effects.
Lucky dog.
Play video games. I never had any restrictions. I never was not allowed to watch.
He says as he stabs a bunny with a voodoo pin.
No, I've never had violent tendencies. Nothing.
You were one of those kids. Like there were a couple kids I knew whose parents were like that, and I was always so jealous.
And that's it's nature versus nurture too.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff you it's hard to determine whether or not what they had in their life affected the way they acted, or if that's them genetically. Like there's a whole argument with that, and I do think it's up to a parent to be on top of these things. Not every kid should be able to see R-rated movies or play these very violent games when they're little, just because they might not be able to handle it, like, mentally. Like, and also
like a scary movie.
Sometimes that can traumatize your kid. It's up to the parent. On top of this, it's the parents. Parents do not pay attention to their kids enough these days. They don't care about what their kids are buying. They don't care about anything. They go into a store, you want this game? Okay. They don't even bother looking at the rating. And then they get mad at the video games for being too violent when it says on the box your kid shouldn't be playing it. Yeah. And see, the thing is the ratings aren't a definitive thing from a parent's perspective. I don't think. It's not like, okay, this thing says 17 plus. So that means I can only buy this for my kid when they're 17. You as a parent should know your kid well enough to understand, okay, my kid's 14 or 15, but he's mature as a 17-year-old.
Yep.
This is fine. It's up to the parent to pay attention to that. It's lazy parents, honestly. And I think that there are different types of violence too that I think affect differently. Like, for instance, I think Doom's violence is a lot different than Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls 3 is very dark. It's a bad example, but it's the only thing I can think of. Yeah, there's blood and stuff, but it's not in-your-face gore.
Speaking of,
I see, realism either.
Especially on the Podcast Beyond Facebook group, I see tons of people posting photos and videos of their kids playing Dark Souls, and I'm like, what the fuck? They're like 6-year-old kids playing Dark Souls and Bloodborne. I'm like, holy shit, I would crap my pants.
From a scary level, not from a violence level, yeah.
I mean, it's totally violent.
From a difficulty level.
It's super fucking violent. There's tons of blood.
I see it as a different type of violence, though. I think that, for me, the way I look at it is, like, I think Dark Souls, it is violent. You can't say it's not.
But it's so fantasy. It's so
unrealistic. But it's very gory, too. I mean, just because it's fantasy doesn't mean it's not, like, real gore with blood flying out.
But to me, I think that is a lot different than, like, a Call of Duty or a Doom or stuff like that. And maybe it has to do with the first-person aspect, too.
Yeah.
That's a big part of it.
I think this isn't really a crazy argument where there's, like, violence is bad or in video games or stuff like that. But the thing we brought up last week is a very valid point of the VR. I think being outside of it and holding a controller and playing a game is one thing. I think once you're in this virtual reality space, that's where it can really mess with your mind. We've had instances, the Google Glass guy, like our phantom vibrations on our phone. That stuff can really mess with you. I think when it starts going to that aspect, parents need to be on top of it. You can't just let your kid play any game in VR. Like, that's going to be a huge thing, and
this conversation is going to come back up when VR takes off.
Like we talked about it on the show. We think that someone's probably going to die within the next year for VR, and that Sony had to put the whole label. You can't, or you're not recommended to play if you're under 12 or 13, I think, and stuff like that. For me, parenting is a big part, like you were talking about, Jared. I think Dom, you mentioned libertarianism. I think one of the big problems that we have today, especially in America, is the fact that parents expect the government to raise their child in a lot of ways.
Yep.
Part of that being with the games or media, movies, TV, whatever.
Right. Go sit in the room. It'll take care of you.
Yeah, the music with the explicit labels. It's all over the place how parents are like, no, you have to make sure my kid can't get access to this. You have to make sure that my kid's not watching or playing this.
And you have to make sure that you got to make sure the neighbor kids and his friends at school aren't either, because he talks to them, right?
Oh, so I
being
think,
a parent,
right? You have to, and it's good to experience what your kids are experiencing, especially at a young age. Like, see what they're watching on TV. Sit down and play next to them. Just get involved with what they're doing. That's a good parent, but also know what your kids are into, know what they're involved in, and experience that for yourself. So okay, this is good. This is too much for them. This is probably something I should wait for till they're older or whatever. And violence in video games is a big part of that, man. You got to, I think, less than Jared, I was more like you, Dom. Like, I probably had to be 10 or 11 before I was playing teen games, and then, yeah, like, by the time I was 12, I was just, like, buying my own M-rated games off of... Shout out to HK-Offer House, because I was getting super cheap Chinese versions of games that would play on my 360, and they were M games that I couldn't buy in America because I didn't have an ID, so... yeah, I totally know where you're coming from, but yeah, I think you gotta watch out for your kids and know what they're into,
And talk to your kids.
Yeah. I mean, just pay attention and make a decision. Based on that. Don't just completely ignore what they're doing. But I want to throw in, I got carded at a GameStop when I bought Dragon Age Inquisition.
That is hilarious.
Literally, I couldn't believe
it.
I was aged 20 or 21.
It's hilarious.
Also, the biggest problem with the United States too is that and I'm for violence if your kid can handle it. Like, I'm not super opposed to it. Like, I really think it's up to a kid to kid basis, like discussing with your kid and stuff like that. I don't think violence is as much of a scary thing. I think there's plenty of other factors in society that can affect your kid negatively outside of video game violence.
We live in the real world.
I don't think it's the only thing. Yeah.
So
I even forgot where I was going with that point,
so building off of
you're right,
of your story, Dom. I was in a GameStop. I was in front of one of my friends who was like 2 or 3 years older than me, right? And you talk about this beard and this hair. A lot of people think I'm way older than I look, or look way older than I am, I should say, because I'm 22 and people think I'm in my late 20s most of the time. And so I was like 16 or 17, and the dude didn't card me, and then he carded my older friend behind me. I was like, Jesus, this is awesome. Yep, exactly.
To that point, when I first met you, I thought you were like 26. I thought you were older than me.
People think I'm pushing 30, man. It's crazy.
I don't think you're that old. I wouldn't say you look that old.
Well, 26, 27, yeah.
Yeah. What were you going to say, though, Dom? To that point, you had something?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Was going? I was talking about how there's outside factors besides video game violence that can affect you.
Oh, yeah. So even though I said earlier that I think it can desensitize you, out of all the things in the world that occur that affect, the mentality of a kid, video games are, even if they're a big gamer, it's probably 1% of what affects it. You know what I mean?
I remember my
point I'm
real
with
quick.
You there.
Let me just, I forgot it. I want to get it out real quick before I forget. It's amazing to me how little America worries about violence, but they're super opposed to you seeing sex stuff. Whereas in Europe, it's the complete opposite. They're whatever, you can see boobs, whatever, but the violent stuff hold back on that, so it's interesting.
Yeah. I think, we live in the global culture, I would say, has a level of violence to it. There's wars going on constantly. There's a lot of fucked up shit in this world, and I think you were talking about
in the past couple of months.
Exactly. So, yeah, you were talking about shielding your kids, Jared. I do think there's something to be said for showing kids, hey, this is what's up. This is real. This is reality. This is what happens. And these are terrible things, but they do occur. On the other hand, I think the reason that a lot of parents get so up in arms about video game violence as opposed to violence in any other media, like you said, Jared, it's been around forever, not just in movies or music or TV shows. It's been around for hundreds of years in books, in novels.
Yep.
And the big reason I think that parents get up in arms about
but Americans don't read, so
the Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, it's sitting right in front of me, friend. Anyways, the reason that parents get so up in arms about video games specifically, I think, is because of the interactivity.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that you're picking up a controller and you're manipulating the environment within the game, and you are the one killing, you are the one slaughtering in Gears of War with your fucking chainsaw on the end of your gun, You are the one making those actions happen and taking those virtual lives in that digital space.
Well, the thing, too, that's great for video gaming as it improves is that we're getting a lot more games where you're learning that killing actually has a cause and effect. Like, there's games where you very rarely kill and you understand how much of an impact it has. There's games now where you don't kill at all. And I think earlier in video games, there was a simple mechanic of there's bad guys, step on them. There's bad guys, jump over them. There's bad guys. And I think as video games have progressed, we still have violent video games. There's always room for that, just like there's always room for horror movies. Like, There's definitely more avenues now, though, where there's non-violent video games. So if you really feel that you don't want your kid to be exposed to that, you can still have your kid play video games. There's plenty of options now. So
it kind of goes both ways, though. There's more of these artistic indie games that don't even have killing or aren't violent. They're really peaceful and chill. But at the same time, because of the fact that a lot of us, like us specifically, we're in that age bracket where we grew up with the advent of video games. They're not that old. They really haven't been around that long. And so people like us, especially men age 18 to 35, buy most of the video games, especially in America. And so video games have become more violent, there's a lot more M-rated games these days because of the demographic that's purchasing the most amount of video games. There's still kids games, there's still non-violent stuff, but there is more saturation of the violence and M-rated stuff because you have more adults playing and buying games.
Yeah, just like there's a ton of misogyny too that's kind of getting whittled away as we go on as well.
Yeah.
So let's get into
all the male power fantasies.
Yeah,